Who has no way to go to the ponds? Okay, then we'll meet you at the ponds.
Said you can carpool with me.
We're gonna try and see if we do any better with the crayfish. Probably not, but let's just get through a quick day. Then next week, we will go to Reelfoot. That I can guarantee you will be good. So after this talk here, that'll be your last lecture for a bit. Yay! Aquatic insects. One of my favorite areas when I talk about them. And the reason why we talk about them is aquatic insects are very, very important freshwater communities. And so we see them in every sort of community. If you think about, I talked a little bit about this when we were at Pacer Pond. The fact that really the ultimate food source for these lakes, in some cases it's greenwoods algae, but in most cases these systems run by detrital food webs. So it's dead leaves and dead material. Well, fish can't eat that. Fish can't eat algae. Well, not a lot of fish anyway, just a few. And so what happens is basically the connection between the energy source and everything, when we think of lakes and streams and all that, are insects. So that's why I want to talk about this. So you find them in lentic systems, you find them in lotic systems, and of course in wetlands. Okay. I want to mention some of these now. So in this one here, this lecture just sort of to kind of let you know ahead of time. I think I'm going to sit down. I'll let you know ahead of time. The scientific names are going to be important, not species, but orders are going to be kind of important. So I'll be going through some of these to talk about things about them in part of their life. So there are some aquatic organisms that their larval stage of their life is entirely aquatic. Okay? This is one of them here. This is Ephemeroptera. I'll be talking more about Ephemeroptera here. So what does Terra mean? P-T-E-R-A. If anyone's had me for 1:30, they should know what that means.
Earth.
What?
Terra is Latin for earth or ground.
Terra, T-E-R, not P-T-E-R-A.
Oh.
Have you ever heard a word that has Terra in it?
Hymenoptera.
Hymenoptera. What does it mean?
Scaled wings.
No, I mean, Terra means wing. Hymenoptera means membranous wings. Okay, so ephemer, what does ephemer sound like to you? Your words start with ephemer.
Ephemeral.
Ephemeral, that's what it means. Okay. Because these guys don't live, they don't live very long as adults. The ephemeral wing. Okay. Odonate. You've seen some of these. Okay, so again, so you at the larval form, and both of these are larvae, by the way. That's the larva on the left of a mayfly, and then on the right, that's the larva of a dragonfly. Plecoptera are the stoneflies. We don't have many around here. This is more of a critter from the eastern part of the country, eastern part of Tennessee. And Trichoptera, caddisflies. So all of these are exclusively, the only places you find them are aquatic habitats when they are larvae. And that's an example of a larva in each one. There's others that most of them are aquatic, or they're pretty much substantial aquatic life forms. And this is one I've been trying to see. Hopefully we'll get some of these at Reelfoot. This is one I talked about before. So this is order Diptera. Order Diptera means those are the flies, 2 wings. And so we'll be talking more about order Diptera in a minute. And that one right there, that is the chironomid, which I keep trying to show you. Trying to see if I can find any. These are both larvae, and this is an adult Coleoptera. Coleoptera are the beetles. This one here, just in the picture here, this is known as a riffle beetle. They live their entire life in water. Hemiptera, the half-wings. Hemiptera, these are the true bugs. Again, all bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs. And this is called a predaceous diving bug. It comes down, grabs its prey, rams its beak into them, injects an enzyme to break down the protein and sucks them up. This guy here, if you've ever seen this one, this is Megaloptera. We have them in some of the streams around here. Great bait for fish. This again is the larval form there. This is a Dobson fly. As a larval form, they're often referred to as Hellgrammites. Okay. So again, most of these are aquatic for half their life, or part of their life, and aerial for the other half of their life. Why might that be? What are the advantages of that?
For be able to get food better, because not many things eat what they eat.
Okay, one thing is the larval stage is the feeding stage, primarily. And so as larvae, there's more food in aquatic systems is that. Okay. Adults is the breeding stage, so they can fly around. The other thing too, the advantage of that is you never compete with your own offspring. So if foods are scarce, it's not like, if you look at other animals like mammals or fish or anything like that, the adults could actually be competing with their own offspring. This never happens with these guys. Okay, so we talked about aquatic systems. We think of the Earth as a water planet, and so they must do really well. The answer is no. There are virtually no aquatic insects in the ocean. So it's not really a sight. But the closest you get are some mosquitoes, which are kind of semi-aquatic, which live in sometimes estuarine systems here. But most of the Earth, there's no insects. The ocean is the realm of the crustaceans. The other thing too is, they're a great tool. Hopefully we'll find some again for this. They tell you the health of the aquatic system you're working on. You can use them for that. There are certain insects that are very, very tolerant of pollution and bad water and all that. And there's a bunch of insects that are very, very intolerant. And so if you find the intolerant species in your aquatic system, it's telling you good things. It's telling you this is clean water. So we'll be talking about some of those just when I start to drill down here a little bit. So what these people are doing here, we did a little bit of this in the creek. These people are kick netting a section. This is a river down in Memphis I was studying called the Nankana. And they're kick netting a section of the Nankana here and seeing what insects can come up. And then everybody smiles. Okay. All right, so some insects, we often describe insects or aquatic invertebrates in general by where they are in the water. So one term, there's some insects, and just like fish, that actually can swim up in, when you're up in the water, we call that being in the water column. That's what we refer to that. So they're actually moving around. They can determine their position. They can swim up, they can swim down, just like a fish. If you can do that, you are known as Newstein. This picture, this is called a phantom midge here. They call it phantom midge because you see right through them. There's some of these in Pacer Pond. I haven't caught any lately, but they're a little predator in the system. So that's, if you can determine where you're at in the water column, you are known as Newstein. If you live on the bottom, and this is a term we've already used before, benthos. If you live in river systems, but if you think of a river system and water's moving fast, we talk about fast flowing systems and all that. Some organisms actually live below the rocks in these systems here. They actually live below the river, below hypo river rios. So they live down in the rocks. So that's another place you can find them. And then there's some that live right at the water surface. This is a perfect example of an animal that's highly, highly adapted from the water surface. This is a whirligig beetle. You've all seen whirligig beetles swimming on the surface. So if you're a whirligig beetle, you're living in two worlds. You're living in the aquatic world. The lower half of your body is aquatic. The upper half of your body is dry. Which way should you be looking?
Into the water.
You should, perhaps. But shouldn't you also be looking up?
Yeah.
They do, both. They have two sets of eyes. So these are the lower eyes. This is the submerged eye here. You can look down and see what's going on here. So they're perfect. They're highly, highly specialized for living on the water surface. A little bit about them. So again, I'm going to have you learn some of these order names. So they're Coleoptera. Those are the order of the beetles. And because they whirligate, they gyrate, they're known as Gyrenidae. Now, things get weird when it comes to, if you're living in water, you know, living in air is a wonderful thing because there's lots and lots of oxygen in the air. You can huge amounts of oxygen, easy to get. Once you're in water, the concentration of oxygen drops really quickly. So oxygen for aquatic insects becomes a major limiting factor. So, in the air, the concentration of oxygen, 200,000 milligrams per liter. So that's a lot of, again, 20% of the air is oxygen. So there's a lot of it there. On a good day in the water, 15 milligrams per liter. That's about it. So there's a big, big drop. So understanding insects, you have to understand how they deal with this drop in oxygen, or how do they get your oxygen. The other thing too is, so you look at this, again, it's a huge concentration gradient. So 15 milligrams per liter of oxygen here, 200,000 milligrams per liter, you would expect it would be just being sucked up by the water, because that's concentration gradient. No, it's water, diffuses very slowly into, oxygen diffuses very slowly into water. Why? Because it's suspended again. It is not dissolved. So because it's suspended, it's very hard to get it into water. So how do different organisms get the energy they need, or the oxygen they need? So first example, okay, so insects have what is called a tracheal system. So again, this is all insects on land. Insects evolved on land and got back into water. If you look at most insects on land, so if I draw the abdomen of an insect here, this is looking down on the abdomen of an insect. What you see is on the side, there are holes. Maybe the number of holes is going to vary from one insect to another. That hole is called a spiracle. Each spiracle leads to a system of tubes. So inside of this body, there are these tubes that run all the way out through the insect. Okay. These tubes are called tracheae. So what happens is, as an insect on land moves around, its body expands and contracts. And so basically it's ventilating. It's pulling air into those spiracles, which are then moving through the tracheae, and every cell gets oxygen. So there's no lung system, but there's plenty of ventilation going on. That's all well and good, unless you get back into the water. Okay. And so a lot of insects that live in the water, these spiracles are closed. They're just basically, there's a thin layer that covers them. And so they have a closed tracheal system. How do they get the oxygen they need? It diffuses through the covering on the spiracle. So in other words, it's very, very tough to get oxygen. They do. So, but what happens is it's flowing, coming through these sides, and the carbon dioxide is coming out. So to do that, though, what you find is it's very hard to do that. So you only find this in very, very small insects. because the demand for oxygen keeps a higher surface area to volume ratio. And it's insects that live in very, very cold waters. This cold water is going to have a higher density of oxygen in it, because we know you can suspend more material and gas as you increase the amount in. So this is a little stonefly here. This is one of the ones that can do this. So the description is that the trachea are closed and they breathe through diffusion through the closures. Limitations, body size, and where they can live. Has to be cold and they can never be very big. Another way to do this, remember, it's all about surface area. Well, what if I can increase the amount of surface area of my body to allow for diffusion to come in without increasing my volume that much? That's the job of gills. So gills are basically, you can see these feathery gills on the back of this mayfly here. These 3 gills coming up on top of this damselfly. What those are they increase the surface area to allow allow more surface area contact with the water. That allows gases to diffuse in much easier than that. So this is known as a burrowing mayfly. And what it does is it digs a hole, a U-shaped hole, sits in there and undulates its body, causes a current to come down so the water runs across these gills. When you look at larval dragonflies, which we looked at, you don't see any gills. They do have gills. They're in its butt. So they breathe through their butts. So all sorts of different ways to do this. The idea is to increase surface area without increasing volume. Increase surface area a lot with very little increase in volume allows you to be more efficient. And there's a trick that, so we as humans, what do? We're oxygen hogs. Even though we're in a world with plenty of oxygen, we burn it up so fast. We have, instead of gills, we have lungs, which is the same idea. We have this massive surface area, and oxygen can get into our blood. But now you got to get into all the tissues. And so what you find, one way to do that is basically you have a molecule, generally a protein, tied to some sort of metal, iron, as an example here. And in humans, it's hemoglobin. What do you know about hemoglobin? What can hemoglobin do?
Takes the oxygen where it needs to go through.
Okay, so you're saying it holds on to oxygen very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's all it did, it would be useless.
And it can also then detach the oxygen.
That's it. It lets it go. Okay, so remember, it's a protein. Well, we know proteins have a certain shape to them, and that's how they function. You can change that shape. You can denature it by putting it under different conditions. Hemoglobin, when the molecule is cool and at a relatively high pH, it grabs oxygen and holds onto it. Okay. Then as it's moving through your body, it's warming up, and in your body, pH is low because carbon dioxide is building up, and the molecule opens up and lets the oxygen go. So it's really cool. So these molecules that can do this, they all have, because they got some kind of iron or another metal in them, iron, some of them have copper in them. They're called respiratory pigments because they all have a color. Blood, of course, is red. Hemocyanin is blue. Some of these other ones here. So, but hemoglobin is used a lot. That's why chironomids, this notice a bloodworm, this is the one I'm trying to show you. They live at the bottom of lakes, and they can survive down there. There's plenty of food, lakes at the bottom of the lake, all that's there, organic matter. But and you don't find a lot of different kinds of insects, but when you do find chironomids, you find lots of them. Because they can live down there because they're able to take up oxygen because of the respiratory pigments that they have. Another trick is use your spiracles. Okay, so in other words, they still have spiracles. They don't have them on every segment and all that. You have a few segments, and the trick is breathe air directly from the atmosphere. So it's sort of like what we would do if we were living underwater. We would go to the surface, take a breath, and then go back down. That's what they're doing. So they have an open spiracular system. So here's some words I'm going to explain to you. What they do is they can hang from the surface film. Okay, so we call that meniscus suspension. They have sphericals, but not like I drew here, showing all these sphericals. What you find is that, so if I draw an insect, so here's here's the water surface here. I've got this tube that hangs down here. Okay. And then here's my critter hanging down here. Let's give him a head. Couple legs. Okay. So I got this tube, and I only have, instead of a whole bunch of sphericals, I only have 2 sphericals. So they have few airways. So oligo means few airway sphericals. Okay, so there's only 2, but that's plenty. So they breathe up there. They have these little tiny hairs right around the opening, which cannot get wet. You cannot wet them. You can try all you want, they won't wet. So when they stick those up through the surface film, spread those hairs out, they hang there. Like I always think about just your clothes hanging in your closet. That's basically what they're doing. So it's not hard at all to live there. You just hang down there. They're breathing air. When they want to dive, they pull those hairs in, and down they go. And when they come up, they shove it up and flip the hairs out again. So the example I'm talking about here, what I draw here, are a type of mosquitoes. Okay? So there are 2 big types of mosquitoes, actually 3, but 2 big types. There's a group called the anophelines, which we don't really care much about, and then a group called the culicines. And the culicines have this tube, and that's how this one is basically breathing through this tube right now. So he's getting plenty of oxygen. Some of them, remember plants, and I didn't go into a whole lot of detail. Remember I guess I did. When I talked about wetlands, I talked about hydrophytes. Hydrophytes are plants that you only find living in wetland habitat, or you find primarily in wetland habitats. How do they live there? Well, they have the same problems as anything else. They need oxygen. So they have tricks for getting, most plants get oxygen from their roots and bring it up into the plant. Not wetland plants, because there's no oxygen in their roots. So they get oxygen from the air and bring it down. Well, there's some insects that figured that out. And so they tap in to the plant. This is an example here. This is a little saw blade here. It taps into the plant and it breathes the air from the plant. So this is meant, yeah, so next names of the insects are important. Again, mosquitoes are really cool. Another trick is, again, it's kind of like us when we go diving. Take a tank with you when you go down. Okay. And so where you see this are a lot of the beetles. You ever see a beetle dive down? Sometimes they look like they're shiny. They have, basically, they have, the back of a beetle has those 2 big hardened wings called the elytron. They can trap a bubble of air inside of that elytron. And that space inside the elytron is called the plastron. And they hold that bubble in there, and they hold the bubble up against their sphericals. So they're breathing air out of the bubble, and so air is coming, so oxygen is coming into their sphericals, carbon dioxide is going back out. So they can go down and stay underwater for a while. And some really interesting, some of my colleagues who study insect physiology said basically they measured the size of that space, okay, not how big it was, determined how much oxygen that space could contain, understood the metabolic rate of the insect, and so basically predicted how long the insect could stay underwater before it needed breath. When they tested it, they found they were wrong. The insects could stay underwater much, much longer than they had figured out. And they had, and it's simple math, it's simple statistic. You know all these things, we could figure this out. We knew that space size, you knew how much oxygen was in that space, you knew the metabolic rates, and you know metabolic rate, of course, is over time. You know exactly how long they stay down there. But they stay down for a significantly longer time. So the question is, how do they do that? And it's way cool. They figured it out. Okay. It's called the physical gill. So here's basically these guys are diving underwater. They've got this bubble. Okay. And it's neat what's going on inside that bubble. Okay, here's how a physical gill works. Okay. He's down there breathing oxygen out of that bubble. So oxygen is leaving the bubble, going into the animal. Metabolic reactions are taking place. Carbon dioxide is coming back out. Okay. Around this animal, of course, is water, oxygen dissolved in it, carbon dioxide dissolved in it, and everything. Okay. So the beetle is respiring. That means carbon dioxide, oxygen is going into the animal, okay, being consumed from the bubble, and as it's being consumed from the bubble, the partial pressure of that bubble is going down. So you're thinking, no, it's not, because it's being replaced by carbon dioxide. Yes and no. Remember, carbon dioxide dissolves in water. Okay. They'll give you the bicarbonate buffering formula yet? It will. What happens is carbon dioxide readily dissolves in water. So carbon dioxide is coming up here, but it's leaving the bubble. Okay. So it's out of the bubble. So what's happening here is the gas pressure in this bubble is going down. Okay. Because oxygen loss, carbon dioxide loss. So partial pressure in the bubble is now much less. That partial pressure means the concentrations of gases in here are much less than they are in the water. And as a result, what happens is gases start to diffuse into the bubble. So what diffuses in? Well, nitrogen will diffuse in, carbon dioxide will diffuse in, but so does oxygen. Okay, so they're basically it's called a physical gill because it's actually sucking it sucks all these gases out of the water, but some of it's oxygen. And that means you can extend your stay down time a lot longer. It's a physical gill. Only found in aquatic insects. Way cool. Okay. So because of the additional oxygen, beetles can remain submerged much longer than you would predict from just the bubble itself. Okay. I talked about fast water, slow water habitats before. Let's talk about some of the critters that live in fast water. If you live in a fast water habitat, what's problem number one?
Getting sucked away.
Yeah, ending up in another habitat. Okay. So so we know the physical characteristics of these habitats. We talked about that fast water. Anything where water is moving greater than 2 meters per second, you have turbulent flow going on. Oxygen is not a problem in these systems because of turbulent flow. You're going to be resuspending oxygen all the time. That's not the trick. The trick is so riffles, riffles, cascades. These are all high examples of systems here. This is a fly larva that lives in one of these high mountain streams. If you look here, this has been turned upside down. It's got a series of 6 suckers. So it can live, basically it sucks onto the rock, hangs onto the rock, and basically hang on there. What you find in these fast water systems, because oxygen is not limiting, you have extremely high diversity. All sorts of things. All you have to do is be able to stay put. If you've got some trick that allows you to stay put, you're in a perfect world. Because not only is oxygen pouring all over you, so is food. You can filter feed out the food, right? Everything you need. All you do is just stay in one place, get your food, and oxygen comes to you. So you get a lot of diversity in these areas and a lot of density too. So whenever you sample streams, whenever you see anyone trying to learn about streams, this is where they go. You go to the fast water habitats and you kick them. That's where that's where the things are going to be. Slow water habitats, rules change. Okay. Again, physical characteristics of these: slow moving water, less than 2 meters per second. We already talked about. These are pools. These are depositional zones. Materials are falling here. Lots and lots of organic matter in these systems here. So plenty of food in these systems here. But that food is slowly decomposing, and as a result, you have high oxygen demand, sucking all the oxygen out of these systems. So it's easy to stay put, but there's nothing to breathe in these systems here. Okay. So adaptations here are all those different tricks I talked about before. One of the classic ones being using pigmented hemoglobin, so to hold on to oxygen. So that's why this is where you're going to find these sort of habitats. Bottom, you're going to find things that have special tricks to deal with oxygen. What you have is, you have these areas here, diversity tends to be extremely low. You don't get a whole lot of different kinds of insects. The adaptation to low oxygen is a very big constraint. Not many things can do it. But if you happen to be something living there that can do it, the density might be high. Maybe lots and lots would be down there. So I was hoping sooner or later we would hit into a big load of chironomas. We might next week, because they only get them out of the lake. Okay, so let's talk about insects in lentic habitats, in other words, lake-type insects here. So there's a big lake here. That's Walnut Grove Lake for those who are from 901ers. Okay. So basically, not all insects live everywhere in the lake. There's special zones. Okay, I think I imagine Dr. Green was told you about some of these zones. So the zone near shore is the littoral zone, unless you're Dr. Greenwood, then it's the littoral zone. So the littoral zone is near shore, and what makes the littoral zone is that light goes all the way to the bottom. Photosynthesis can take place anywhere in the water column, right to the bottom. Okay. This is the zone where you have aquatic plants. So it's sort of interesting, when you're talking about aquatic plants and you're talking about wetlands, you call them hydrophytes. When you're talking, so that's how you can spot a wetland ecologist. If it's a lake ecologist, he calls them macrophytes, or she calls them macrophytes. It's the same damn plant. Okay. So just to let you know, macrophyte, hydrophyte means the same thing. And so you can have different life forms of these. Some of these are rooted to the bottom and come up out of the water, like cattails. We call that emergent macrophyte. Some of them float on the surface. They come up, and their stems are basically a lot of the water lilies that we'll be seeing out at Reelfoot Lake are floating. And there's certainly two types of floating. This is duckweed. Okay. We'll see this on ponds all over the place. It truly is floating. This is one of the smallest of the vascular plants that exist. It floats on the surface, it goes around. So that's true floating. There's also attached floating. So they're rooted, but they're floating on the surface. So the water lilies we're talking about are attached floating. We'll see those. And then there's submersed. This is where the leaves are underwater. But so so these are three different types of macrophytes you can get, hydrophytes, whichever way you want to call it. Littoral zones have very high diversity. Because if you think about it, you've got a whole variety of habitats. So this is like living in a forest. You can live on the surface, you can live at the bottom, you can live all through here, plenty of food. So they're pretty good. They're shallow enough that, especially if you've got plants with submerged vegetation, then they're going to be pumping oxygen into these systems. So it's a good place to live. Usually in lentic systems, the littoral area has the highest diversity. Okay. So things at the benthic, in the water column, and at the water surface. Also, you get a lot of things that are semi-aquatic. They live on the plants out of the water. So they're close to the water, they live on the plants that, so again, there's lots and lots of things that live in the littoral zone. And in a lentic system, that is the highest diversity. The limnetic zone, that's often referred to as the open water area here. That's where, as you're on the lake, you have effective light penetration into the lake, but it doesn't reach the bottom. So basically what it reaches down to, you measure, so if I'm up here near the surface with all this light, the photosynthetic rate is going to be much higher than the respiration rate. As I go deeper and I lose light, what's happening is the photosynthetic rate is going down, and the respiration rate is probably staying about the same. But then I'll eventually hit a point where respiration and photosynthesis are equal. That's called the compensation depth. Everything above the compensation depth is limnetic. Now, so this is, they're showing it here. I think maybe Dr. Greenwood might have used the term photic zone. So photic zone is both the limnetic and the littoral together. But if it doesn't go all the way to the bottom, we call it limnetic. Not much lives out here. This is very few insects. There's not a lot going on here. You have too much of a separation from the oxygen and the food source. Below the compensation is called the profundal zone. Okay, and that's basically where you've got a lot of buildup of organic matter down here. Things sink to the bottom here, and at this point here, respiration is going to be, because of decomposition, is going to be very, very high. Photosynthesis is going to be non-existent because you're below the compensation depth. Very harsh conditions. Does anything live down here? Sure. Okay, the benthic community down here is going to, once again, it's going to be low diversity, just like we saw when I showed you before, when I showed you ponds, or in loading systems rather. Low diversity, but the density could be high if you get a lot of critters living down there that could feed on that sort of stuff. In wetlands basically are giant littoral zones. That's the best way I can think about talking about that. High diversity, you get benthic critters, water column critters, water surface critters, so it's basically the same to it. And the other thing you find about wetlands, because you have, compared to a true littoral system, you've got a lot more semi-wet lands too, so you get a lot more plants. You have plants moving up into these systems here. And so many of the insects are plant feeders in these systems here. So in a true littoral zone, they're feeding on detrital matter or they're feeding on algae. They're not feeding on true plants as much as you, there's some, but in a wetland system, you get a lot of plant eaters. Okay. Again, so we'll come back to the point that there are aquatic insects that if you have poor water quality, they're not going to be there. The standard line is they're the canaries in the mine. If you sample an area and you find lots of intolerant species of insects, that's telling you have good water quality. If you sample an area and you find lots of species that are very tolerant, it doesn't tell you have bad water quality. Okay, don't fall for that sometimes. It just tells you that that's what's there. The only answer comes, it could have other ones there, but they're just not there. So you have these different tolerant ranges, different things there. So community composition then, who's there, can indicate environmental health. If I'm getting a lot of intolerant insects, that's telling me that this system's in good shape. Yeah, we did that, okay. Later on, at the end of this lecture, I'm going to mention some of these insects. There's, when I get to the different orders, I'll be talking about that sort of stuff. What am I doing for time? Oh, yeah. Okay. So, communities, these insects are just like anything else. They interact. Normally when we think about how communities interact with each other, we think of who eats who. Those are called trophic levels. Who is the primary producer? Who is the primary consumer? Who's the secondary consumer? And so you think of all these different levels. That's generally how we think about community interactions. And so where do you get your energy source? I get it because I do photosynthetics. I get it because I eat detrital material. I get it because I eat something that eats detrital material. Okay. And so we tend to think about these food chains. So primary producers being fed on by primary consumers, by secondary, tertiary, quaternary. Okay. Another way to do this are called guilds. And by the way, all these ones I'm giving you here, we don't use in aquatic systems. So that's a nice idea. It doesn't. Trophic levels, we don't use them in aquatic systems. Guilds. A guild is basically is an organism that consumes the same resource in the same way. Okay. So for example, this is a paddlefish that feeds on algae. How does it feed on algae? It opens its mouth and swims through it. Okay. This is a Chinese paddlefish. This is an American paddlefish. Okay. Completely different species, in fact, they're completely different families. But they get the same food the same way. They feed on algae, feed on suspended material just by swimming through it with their mouth open. So they're the same guild. So if if I'm a bird that feeds on fish, an egret that feeds on fish, or I'm an osprey that feeds on fish, with the same gill. Grab the fish and eat it. Okay. Gills don't work well with aquatic systems either. Okay. See, because the primary food source, these again, as important as Dr. Greenwood's algae are, it's not the major food source. It's particulate organic matter. It's broken down pieces of detritus is the primary food source, little particles. Those particles may be big, coarse particulate organic matter. They may be small, fine particulate organic matter. But those are the food sources. So what we do in aquatic systems is we define things by what size organic matter do you eat. This is how it's done. Okay. So coarse particulate organic matter, one food source, anything organic matter that's bigger than a millimeter in size. Okay. Anything that won't flow through a mesh of a millimeter in size. So basically those wash buckets that we use to clean samples, I think those are probably a ½ millimeter in size. But that gives you some idea of what coarse matter, most of the coarse matter would be stuck on those wash buckets we use. Fine particulate matter is less than a millimeter, but greater than 0.45 microns. What a weird number. I'll explain why in a minute. And then we call anything that's smaller than 0.45 microns dissolved. It may not truly be dissolved. It may still be a particle, but this is it. So why this split here? Why at 0.45 microns? Because 4-5. So basically, if you're trying to look at different food sources, you're going to be using filters a lot. You know, filters in different size stuff. You know, millimeter filters, you take out your coarse. You got your fine. If I want to separate my fine from dissolve, I have to push through a filter. The smallest filter that you can mass produce is 0.45 microns. Anything smaller than that, it's too expensive. Anything larger than that, you're not really doing the job. So it's simple. They declared 0.45 microns because it's a small filter that you can make, and it's still pretty cheap. So that's where that comes from. And so they're eating organic matter. They don't really care what, something might be an animal, might be plant, might be whatever. This is a filter feeder here. So there's an insect living inside of this trumpet thing. Water comes in, you can see the material gets caught on the mesh of the trumpet, and it feeds on that. Okay, so that's basically what it's eating there. And it doesn't care what it's eating. So everything is omnivorous. So we don't have primary consumers, secondary consumers, anything like that. They just eat whatever they get. So that's why gills don't work well. Trophic levels don't work well. Instead, we define everything by what are called functional feeding groups. A functional feeding group is basically organisms that obtain their food the same way. We don't care what they're eating. How do they get it? Examples. Okay, so these are these insects here. These are stoneflies, and there's that other fly here. So basically, talking about some of these. One group of organisms we call the scrapers. What scrapers do, this is a snail. Snail's a good example of a scraper. Lots of things. They feed on stuff, on organic matter that grows on surfaces. So Dr. Greenwood talked about periphyton, perilithon, perixylon. What that stuff is growing on the surface of rocks, the stuff that you slip on and fall. It may be algae, it may be bacteria, it may be organic matter stuck to the bacterial matrix. That's what they do is they feed on it the same way, they scrape it off. So these are called scrapers. And so they could be eating algae, microbes, and then fine particulate matter. So one group are called the scrapers. Another group are called the shredders. And what shredders do, shredders go after coarse particulate organic matter. They feed on the rough stuff, the big things, and tear it into little pieces and feed on it that way. So they're shredding. And so if you think about what they do, is they're converting coarse matter into fine particulate matter. And fine particulate is now stuff that breaks loose, they poop out, all that becomes fine particulate organic matter. And so what are they eating? Again, mostly it's dead material, but they're also feeding on the microbes. In fact, in general, this might be indicated, the microbes, the fungi, the bacteria that live on dead stuff is actually what they're going after. Not so much the dead plants, but what they're living on here. That's known as the peanut butter and cracker theory. When you eat a cracker with peanut butter on it, you're really going after the peanut butter. Your cracker's just something to hold it on. So this is what is known as the peanut butter and cracker theory. So I've talked about shredders, scrapers. The next group are called the collector-gatherers. Remember, we have those slow water habitats where all of that stuff is falling to the bottom. Well, if you live in one of those houses, all you do is walk around and pick up pieces to eat. That's basically a collector-gatherer. This is a little mayfly here, collector-gatherer, and just crawls along the bottom, picks up the stuff that's settling to the bottom. It might be detritus, might be phytoplankton, might be poop from upstream, whatever. Collector-gatherers feed on settling fine particulate organic matter. So they sit there and it falls down top of them, and they walk around and eat it. You find them in slow water habitats. There are also collectors in fast water habitat, but they're not collector-gatherers. They don't have to walk around and gather it because the food's going to be coming to them. We call them collector-filterers. So what they do is they have special adaptations for taking things out of the water. These are black fly larvae that have these big fans on their head. They put the fans up in the water and collect the fine particulate organic matter as it goes by. You can't really see them here, but these are little nets made by caddisflies. Again, I showed you that one before, that trumpet-shaped caddisfly net. It's basically the food comes to them, and they just siphon it out of the water. Again, what are they going to feed on? It could be anything. They're omnivorous. If you feed zooplankton, phytoplankton, detritus, it doesn't matter. They don't have to move around. Food comes to them. That's a great energy savings. You just sit there and you hold up your fan, and you collect it and you feed off your fan. So it's kind of a cool way to live. Find them in fast water habitats, needless to say. The ones that you find in slow water are things like mussels, which also, they are also filter feeders. They bring the water into the siphon, pass it by their gills, and suck out any sort of crap that's in the water and feed on it that way. So there are some slow water habitats too. The last group I want to talk about, this is the closest to a trophic level that there is, because these are predators, but they feed on other organisms here. So this is a predatory stonefly, and this is that predatory hemipteran, the true bug I was talking about before, predaceous diving beetle. There's two ways these guys work. One is they eat kind of like we do. They grab their prey, chew it up into pieces. And the other one, so those are engulfers. The other ones are piercer suckers. They're the ones that jab in some sort of proboscis, inject an enzyme to break down the proteins, a proteolytic enzyme, and then suck it back up. But it's the same sort of thing. They feed on other organisms. So this, I don't want you to know this. I put this up here because this is when people think about rivers and how all these things interact with each other. This is sort of what they think about. Okay, but we could walk through this, so I'm not going to. Okay. So here's an example of a collector-gatherer. Okay. this mayfly here, this is a collector filterer. If you look at its front leg, it has these hairs that come off its front leg that holds up together stuff. Okay. This, sometimes we see these around here, this is called a water scorpion. They're piercer suckers. This is one attacking a tadpole here. Okay. This is an engulfer, so that a lousy picture, but that's a dragonfly eating a mosquito larva. So these are, if you want to take a picture of this, please feel free. If I don't have that notes. These are some of the aquatic orders I want you to know about. Ephemeroptera are the mayflies. Odonida, dragonflies and damselflies. Plecoptera, stoneflies. Trichoptera, caddisflies. Diptera, true flies. Hemiptera, true flies. Megaloptera are known as the Dobson flies, and Coleoptera, the beetles. Okay. I have a little bit more, and I can finish it up some other time, but remember, before I leave, I want to talk about three groups in particular. Just want to mention them quickly. Where am I at? Am I over? Oh, just about. Okay. So, three I want to point out are Ephemeroptera, Plecoptera, Trichoptera. EPT. Has anyone heard of EPT? EPT, these are, without a doubt, these three orders are the most sensitive to pollution. So when you're when looking at stream systems, you're looking for mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies. You're looking for EPT. So just to let you, so when you find those, they're indicative of good water quality. So when I come back, when I finish this lecture up, I'm going to just talk a little bit about each one of these orders, and that'll be the last of that. I'll bug you about that. But that's a lot of material here, so I'm going to stop right there for now. Any questions?
I want us to just know the orders and what they specify by like their common names, or you just.
I would know the orders and the common names for sure, and then when I go through these, I'll give you little hints about what's important about some of these. So imagine, if you will, you saw a matching problem with all these up there, and I should say, which three of these orders are important for testing for water quality? Which of these orders are the beetles? Which of these orders talk about something like that? You know, I can see a matching problem like that. We didn't all know what matching problem. You need me to do that up there? Yeah.
No, that's good.
EPT, you said, for pollution?
Yeah, EPT.
EPT, yeah. These are the three big ones. This is what people are looking for. These are have the most of the intolerant organisms in them. Okay, I'm going to shut that down. Alrighty, I'm going